Gate Sentinel just flagged us. Signature rejected. They've shut us out, barked the comms officer aboard TAS Magnar. His fingers hovered rigidly over the abort panel, breath caught somewhere between protocol and disbelief. Across the bridge, Commander Bren Harkle stared at the blinking transit lattice, now flushed in red. Not flashing, static. That was worse. Reroute through Halden 12. Use fallback chain. Already tried. Every Concord link route is quarantining Terran vessels. Lockout is global. The bridge went silent, not in fear, but calculation. Harkle stood still, gloved hands curling against the armrests of his chair. A red arc slithered across the forward display. Quarantine class detected. Access prohibited. Not one alarm, not one contact hail. Just a quiet isolation field tightening across every known corridor. Pull us back to Sol orbit. I want a tactical uplink with Assembly Command in 10, no broadcast, internal channel only. The crew didn't move quickly, they moved carefully, like men aware they'd been handed a sentence rather than a warning. Across hundreds of Terran ships in neutral sectors, the same signal appeared. No variance in wording, no sign of mediation. The Concord hadn't just rejected Earth, it had placed a seal on its name. In a sub-oceanic command vault beneath the Atlantic fault line, Earth's unified assembly convened. The chamber was broad, shielded in composite lattice concrete that groaned faintly under continental pressure. Every man in the room looked tired, not from labor, but from the anticipation of this moment. They hadn't come to prevent a decision, they'd come to feel its weight. At the far end of the table, a thick black envelope was placed before Varen Solis. Strategic Director, not Admiral, not Chancellor, just the title that made the most sense when Earth stopped trusting titles. He didn't open it, not yet. Counselor Ruin Trivak leaned forward, his knuckles pressed flat against the graphite table. They didn't negotiate, not a counterpoint, not even a discussion on tariff splits or non-military status. Solis replied without lifting his gaze, because it wasn't trade they feared. So its ideology, Trivak asked? Its trajectory? Solis's voice didn't carry anger. It didn't need to. It moved through the chamber like a closing door. General Halvar Morn sat with his arms crossed, his eyes flicking to the sealed envelope. Concord hasn't done this to any other Tier 3 civilization in recorded interstellar charter history, not even the Ascari, during their weaponization trials. Trivak grunted. They fear us? No, Solis said. They don't think we belong. It's worse. The room darkened slightly as the external shields shifted under pressure flow. The flicker caught on the single display, an orbital feed of Terran cargo lanes now empty. Root threads snapped, mid-strain, like veins without blood. Trivak's fingers tapped the table in irregular rhythms. We can lodge formal protest. File the charter violation under Spec 22 subparticle. We won't, Solis cut in, because we asked them to let us in, and they've replied. He reached for the envelope, slicing the seal with a thumb knife clipped under his coat. Inside was a single data slate, no seal, no banner, not even the Concord's diplomatic insignia. Just a short message centered. Application. Rejected. Terran classification updated to quarantine class. All Concord-linked gates now filtered. Do not attempt contact. It wasn't political language. It was system level. As if Earth had ceased to be a negotiation point and become a procedural hazard. Trivak sat back, visibly drained. If this spreads... It already has, Morn interrupted. Outposts on Lyra Verge and the Sirius Spur have both reported lockout. No gate acknowledgement. Supplies had to be cold-jumped back through relay tug. Solis placed the data slate on the table like a tool laid down for the last time. They're not blocking us to provoke, they're doing it to contain. The air systems gave a brief mechanical sigh as the bunker auto-suggested flow ratios, and everyone shifted slightly as the oxygen composition fluctuated. Not for comfort, for calculation. Then we respond? Trivak said not as a question but as tradition. The protocol hung in the room like a weapon that had never been drawn. Solis shook his head. No fleets, no noise, no retaliation. Morn leaned forward, wary. Then what? We build, Solus replied. Not to re-enter, not to request, but to bypass, quietly. You're suggesting unilateral transit? I'm stating it. Morn turned toward the terminal. Gate code replication is not the goal, Solus interrupted again. We don't mimic their gates. We erase the need for them. A moment passed. A slow, deep moment. The kind of pause that doesn't follow from shock, but from re-evaluation. Trevok narrowed his gaze. Transit independence from gate chains would isolate us further. No, Solus said. It will let us cross through their seals like they were never there. They closed their gates. Fine. We'll build one they can't even approach. From above, the low thud of continental shift groaned through the walls, a dull tectonic acknowledgement that Earth itself had heard the rejection. Morn studied Solus now, not in disagreement, in measurement. Do you want a title for the initiative? Solus stood, voice flat. Gate Forge. In orbit, the TAS Magnar hovered near Sol's outer anchor ring, its running lights dimmed, its crew silent. The captain stared at the gate structure now permanently rendered inaccessible, the Concord beacon above it flashing neutral white. Then it blinked to black. No signal, no permission, no audience. Only blockade. In the central hold, one of the junior officers brought over a diagnostic print. A bold new overlay scrawled across their transit chart. Red, sharp, final. Classified as hazard mobility. Do not anti-season. No exceptions. The captain didn't curse. He simply folded the print in half and walked it to the burn bin. Earth wouldn't break the gate. They'd never need to. The door to the assembly vault had barely closed when Varan Salas descended the north corridor toward the lower lab sector. His stride was exact, his coat dragging faint streaks of condensation across the floor tiles, boots striking steel composite with a rhythm born of purpose, not pace. Behind him, 2 security staff followed without a word, their eyes catching the frost collecting at the base of the insulated conduits. Down here, the air held a weightless cold. No air current, no warmth, only the flat static of a facility, running silent and buried beneath the fault line. Dr. Alric Denat waited beside the secondary lock. He didn't speak right away. He handed Solus a retinal tablet, still unlit. It bore no military stamps, no institutional design. This is ready for execution, Denat said. But the calculations were rebuilt from non-symmetrical lensing data. Solus took the tablet. Unstable? Unconventional. Denat's left sleeve was rolled up. The fabric was marked with coolant residue, and his skin still carried traces of contact burn from raw quantum housing. He hadn't been out of the containment lab in nearly 4 days. I don't need conventional, I need a gate no one else can see until it's behind them, Solus said. He thumbed the tablet active and entered his override sequence without hesitation. Directive, Halion. Authorization transferred, lock confirmed. The secondary vault depressurized with a mechanical groan, exposing a chamber filled with support scaffolds wrapped around a half-built transit ring. It didn't resemble any Concord design. No hard symmetry, no spherical core, no stabilizing fins. Its shape was wrong on purpose. Denat walked ahead, guiding Solus through the perimeter grid, past shielding rods and coupling segments. At the center of the platform stood the anchor ring. A wide, incomplete torus, laced with glyph pathways burned directly into the frame. The alloy didn't gleam. It absorbed light, muting every reflection like a shadow refusing to be known. We built it to fracture field memory instead of mirror transit corridors. It generates bleed distortions through null-space lensing, Denat explained. We're not pushing ships across space. We're folding local gravity into linked points, then routing through them by vector bleed. Jump without entry, Solus muttered. No confirmation, no trace. Denat nodded. And no return path for anyone else. You don't map it, you train it. Solus ran a hand over the cold, glyph-etched surface. The contact vibrated through his wrist. Subtle, like a distant hum buried beneath his bones. But it wasn't sound. It was memory registration. The ring was syncing with his nervous system through microelectric feedback. "What's the biological integration layer?" he asked. Denath circled the anchor. Each ring responds only to encoded Terran biopatterns. That includes tissue charge, psychological signal rhythm, and pulse cadence. If a Concord being steps through, the system doesn't react. It doesn't even acknowledge. So it's not rejection, it's blindness. To them, yes. Solus paused. And to us, it listens. They stood in silence as the chamber lights dimmed slightly, and the core anchor surged with a low, field-reactive glow. Nothing dramatic, just a shimmer along its edge like heat over cold steel. The glyphs lit one by one, activating. Solus turned toward the observation deck above. "How long until first test?" "Courier vessels on standby in upper Sol orbit. We link this ring to Anchor 2 at Kirel perimeter. Estimated field fold in 17 minutes. Solus walked toward the uplink terminal and keyed into the relay comm, a direct signal to Taz Vanquir, a courier-class vessel waiting on launch grid. "This is Solus. Begin warm-up sequence. Transit in 17, use Anchor 1. No external broadcast." The voice crackled back, clean, sharp, confirmed. "Helm activating bleed vectors now, routing all through internal null space." Denath monitored the glyph flow. The inner ring shimmered again, briefly destabilizing the surrounding air like a mirage stretching across fractured pavement. The glyph spun, then froze. "Lock attained," he said. High above Earth's thermosphere, Taz Vanquir adjusted its orientation, deploying 2 dorsal bleed fins, their edges crackling with quiet tension as they bent the field layers around them. No light burst, no gate tunnel. Just a single vibration through space like something had been moved. But no one saw what, or where. The vessel vanished from Terran orbit. The room went still. Denath immediately accessed Anchor 2 logs. The screen showed blank, then a marker pinged. Not on the expected coordinate. It landed inside Kirel restricted territory. The room narrowed to breath. Solus stared at the incoming readout. It wasn't flashing. It wasn't urgent. It was clean. The screen chirped. "Inbound transmission from Taz Vanquir. As confirmed." The ping ended. No trace signature, no gate imprint, no recorded jump vector. Solus turned toward Denath. "Deactivate the array, cut the bleed, archive the record under Ghost Layer 1. Denath keyed in the shutdown. The glyphs faded in reverse order, the anchor ring cooling visibly. "Do we issue a report?" Denath asked. "To who?" Solus replied, heading for the exit. As they left, one last figure stepped into the control chamber. Colonel Jex Marn. He stared at the now silent anchor. His eyes didn't widen. They narrowed. "What did you just do?" he asked, voice flat. Solus looked at him, then at the glyph-lined ring. "We left containment." Outside Earth's orbit, a Concord surveillance probe drifted silently. Its internal systems registered a faint anomaly in local gravitic pressure, but it couldn't map a source. It filed the event under transient anomaly and continued its patrol. It had no idea anything had passed beneath its watch. The new gate hadn't opened. It had simply folded, blinked, and moved the world around it. The interior of the Concord Strategic Command Chamber was built to eliminate uncertainty. White surfaces, fixed lights, hard lines, no shadows, no ornament. Every corner of the room was shaped to reflect control. That illusion fractured the moment the first Terran vessel blinked into the Pyrrhothan drift without registry. Counselor Thren Vosk stood motionless before the overhead tactical screen. It displayed a clean white grid, sector-locked, time-stamped, and perfectly archived. In the upper right quadrant, a new object hovered. Not tagged, not logged, just there. As if it had always belonged, the observers spoke in staggered turns, each one aware of what it meant and equally unwilling to say it. "Do we have a vector?" one asked. "Negative," came the reply. "No drive flare, no entry spike, no subspace echo. It just was." Vosk stepped forward. Zoom. The screen expanded. There it was. Terran class profile, independent designation. It drifted with purpose, not drift. No lights broadcast. No signal beacon. A junior intelligence tech turned in his chair, his back taut. "This is TNV Glace, last listed in pre-quarantine manifest. It's not flagged for military escort. And yet it's sitting in a Concord buffer zone," Vosk said, his voice flat but slow. Another ping. The screen updated again. A second Terran ship appeared just outside Varmok threshold. A route under full Sentinel lockdown. Then a third entered the Kalin band, hovering along a corridor used only by diplomatic relays. All three bore no entry trails, no gate use, no transit log. 3 unarmed Terran ships, the comms officer said, his voice quieter now, crossed 3 classified Concord boundaries, and not a single sensor caught a jump. The silence that followed wasn't fear. It was fracture. The room had been built to maintain supremacy, every protocol written in the belief that any breach would come with force or declaration. Vosk broke the pause. "Don't alert the public assembly, keep all gate logs internal, issue silent probe commands to each sector. I want triangulation attempts within 30 minutes. The chamber moved fast. Officers fanned across comm panels, hands striking console keys like hammers shaping armor. No lights dimmed. No alert sounded. But under the surface, Concord knew it had been exposed. Far beneath Earth's orbital edge, inside a hardened vault dug into lunar basalt, Colonel Jex Marn reviewed the mesh ring display from a private feed. The mesh wasn't visible to the naked eye, only through composite overlay. Dozens of faint, interlinked anchor points blinked in rhythmic sequence, forming a fractured shell across Earth's shipping lanes. "They're starting to react," he muttered, his fingers grazing the side of a cooled data slate. "I want probes seeded with false bleed trails, 6 of them, burst deployed." 2 command engineers complied, each one adjusting their transmission sequence generators. They input trails mimicking gatefold signatures, carefully distorted to simulate real gravitational activity, but with subtle Terran artifacts embedded. The goal wasn't to provoke Concord action, it was to force their scanners into failure. The probes launched from the dark side of the moon, ejecting silently across multiple vectors. Each one left behind a wake trail crafted to confuse, not alarm. Back in Concord space, the Varmok threshold's long-range scanner relays picked up the artificial trails. To their systems, it looked like 5 more Terran vessels had crossed without clearance. One even appeared inside a closed military staging ring, a location that hadn't seen unauthorized contact in decades. Concord's primary data core flooded with conflict alerts. Redundant scans ran back to back, each one came up clean. "No entry point, no drive decay," one technician said under his breath, sweat collecting along his temple. "Every time we think we're seeing the whole pattern, it changes." Vosk received the report within minutes. His jaw tensed as he stared at the map. The trails were chaotic, too wide to be coincidence, too deliberate to be guesswork. "They're not attacking," he said quietly. "They're maneuvering." Within Earth's transit command, Varen Solis reviewed the surveillance footage without sound. The Conqueror's desperate trail chasing looked more like animals tracking reflections than strategy. He didn't smile. He didn't lean back. He pressed 2 fingers into his temple and closed his eyes. "We're past denial," Marn said, standing at the opposite side of the chamber. "They'll realize soon. You want to prepare messaging?" "We don't issue anything," Solis replied. "You want them to keep guessing?" "I want them to keep reacting." Solis rose and walked to the display showing Earth's orbital perimeter. The translucent mesh pulses blinked one by one, each linked to an anchor point encoded with full Terran biometric chain locks. It wasn't just access control, it was structural denial. "This was never about permission, it was about redesign," he said. At a Concord naval outpost near the Drekon Rift, General Althvo Sear stood beside a war table lit in red-tinted projections. At its center, a web of Terran ghost paths intersected key trade lanes. Each line formed without origin, their ends dissolved before modeling could predict future coordinates. You expect me to believe they've developed independent gate functionality without central amplification arrays? He asked the technician. I expect nothing, General, the man replied, sweat coating the collar of his uniform. I'm showing you what they've done. Wosir stared at the map. Earth wasn't pushing against boundaries. It had stopped recognizing them. Within the Concord Central Forum, several member species convened in private subchambers. Arguments escalated over control protocols, the failure of current gate oversight, and whether Earth had weaponized new transit in secret. Counselor Darn Vesic of the Alciran block slammed his data crystal onto the surface. Ellie didn't petition for territory. They didn't demand negotiations. And now their ships cross wherever they choose. How is this not an invasion by function? Another delegate leaned forward. There are no weapons aboard, no signals sent. They aren't imposing, they're existing. Vesic's hands tightened. And yet we can't follow, we can't even trace. As the debate roared behind closed walls, Earth's response was total silence. No statement, no rebuttal, no threat. Only 3 Terran ships still visible across conquered space, hovering in stillness like placeholders in a new equation no one else understood. They weren't waiting. They were watching. The suits fit perfectly. That was the first warning sign. Inside a containment chamber aboard CSV Orion, a Concord stealth vessel shadowing Terran orbital perimeter, 6 operatives stood silently. Their uniforms bore no insignia, no military cuts, just the neutral fabric replication pulled from outdated Terran biospec sheets. Facial structures had been surgically mapped, pulse rhythm embedded to mimic soul nabitals, bone density adjusted via tissue injection. On paper, they were Terrans. But the gate didn't care about paper. Lead operative J.L. Divrad adjusted the neural anchor on his neck, then ran a gloved hand across the encoded passband card secured in his collar. His eyes flicked toward the window, where Earth's gate mesh glimmered like frost across invisible lines, flickering only when disturbed by orbit-stabilized calibration pings. We cross through log environmental baseline, return in 10, he said into his wrist relay. Command returned nothing. Standard protocol. If anything went wrong, fallback was independent tray set and blind jump. That procedure had never been used. Until today. The dropcraft launched from Orionar's underside. No ignition signature, no energy spike. It coasted on directed kinetic momentum, spiraling slowly toward Gate Anchor 11, the smallest Terran entry point in orbit. The ring appeared inert, a dead wheel slowly spinning in low rotation, silent and dark. Inside Earth's ground-based transit control array, Dr. Alric Denat monitored mesh movement from a wall mount interface. His breath condensed slightly from the temperature drop in the room. The cooling system had been deliberately undercalibrated to reduce infrared traceability across quantum interactions. Every part of this room functioned as shadow. Varen Solis entered, reading from a thin project slate. Inbound trajectory doesn't match any registered Terran beacon. Tracked it, Denad replied. Biological profile cloned from early human genome, external stimulus replication accurate to 97%. Gate response. DNAC tapped the primary console. Mesh ignored the entire craft, not even rejection. It didn't recognize an entry attempt. Sola stepped closer to the display. The gate appeared to ripple once, then sealed. No light, no feedback, only stillness. He thought matching our biology would be enough, Solis murmured. They keep thinking we built this from genes and machines. Ellies still don't understand, Denat said. It doesn't recognize tissue. It responds to origin. Every Terran signal carries thought cadence fingerprints. Neural rhythm is native. Identity isn't mimicry, Solis finished. Above, the infiltrators reached anchor range. They drifted closer, checking for ambient frequency. The ring offered nothing, not even a failed handshake. It floated past them, silent and disinterested. like a door that had never opened. Inward. Jald Ivrat keyed his entry pass again. A small scanner on his arm flashed white, then dropped to null. He tapped twice more. The ring didn't engage. One of the operatives turned to him, eyes tight. No confirmation. Reattempt sequence 4. No response. Then wait. They waited. The gate remained indifferent. Inside Concord Central Command, Vosk stared at the black screen fed from Orion. The operation had gone quiet. No logs returned. No heartbeat sync. No exit markers. The infiltration craft hadn't been destroyed. It simply stopped being seen. How long has the ring been inert? Vosk asked. Since the team arrived. They're at full biometric sync, but there's no response, the officer replied. They're in breach? They're not in anything. Vosk closed his eyes. Get the assembly leaders into private summit, now. The room scattered into motion. Back on Earth, Colonel Jex Marn entered the command vault, a cold packet of protein rations still unopened in his hand. He tossed it onto the tray beside Dinat's console and leaned against the pillar, watching the mesh visualization shift as the orbit decayed slightly for recalibration. They tried to walk through like it was their house, Marn said. Imitation, right down to tooth structure. Copying isn't the crime, Dinat replied. Assuming it would work is. Gates saw it? Didn't even blink. Marn nodded slowly. Then let's give them more to misread. Inside the Concord Assembly's inner chamber, 12 delegates surrounded a map table showing Earth's orbit. Every known Concord gate required gate-anchored verification, pulse acknowledgement, and drive-read latency. Terran gates didn't request anything. They responded based on proximity and encoded pattern logic. Counselor Darn Vesic slammed a thermal glove onto the table. You're saying their system evaluates thought? Counselor Thren Vosk didn't answer immediately. He tapped the edge of the console, cycling through the rejected entry logs. They've encoded psychological sequencing into their infrastructure. Not just biological. It responds to Terran neurological imprint. No clone, no suit, no signal can mimic it without a mind shaped by Earth. Billy locked it against understanding. Vosk nodded. They didn't close a gate. They built a door only they could remember how to open. Back in orbit, the infiltration craft drifted. The pilot's final attempt to reboot the identity handshake failed. His hands had started shaking. Subtle, then uncontrollable. The gate's indifference wasn't just silence. It was judgment. 37 minutes later, Concord lost all signal. Not from destruction, from desynchronization. The infiltrators still existed. The system had simply stopped acknowledging their presence. The emergency summit reconvened without rest. We have to send diplomatic contact, Vesic insisted. This is retaliation cloaked as infrastructure. No, Vosk countered. They haven't attacked anyone. They've only removed themselves. That's not war, that's doctrine. What's your proposal? Another delegate asked. Vosk stared at the hollow point on the map where the infiltration craft had vanished. Nothing we send will be heard, unless it thinks like them. That means we don't have access. The room fell still. Earth had denied them the only thing they couldn't replicate, origin. Below, Solus watched the mesh visual feed cycle through its folding pattern. Each ring curved inward and locked on itself like an iris sealing over a pupil. Not in defense, but in apathy. We didn't build this to keep them out, he said to no one. We built it so they'd never be noticed again. Cargo vessel Vostrel Curie blinked out of Tarak Gate with a full load of transpolymer rods and a hold manifest cleared by Concord Port Authority 38 minutes earlier. Its destination, Vassar Relay Station, a standard 2-jump loop with no atmospheric breaches and minimal relay delay. It should have arrived on the 3rd cycle. Instead, it reappeared 3 sectors east, directly within Earth's orbital trade mesh. The vessel's pilot, a Kasari tradesman named Joran Feck, hadn't touched his controls since the gate closed behind him. The moment they stabilized post-jump, the onboard navigational panel displayed a cold blue terrain signature labeled Terran Lattice Zone Passive Lock. There were no threats, No radio contact, no demand to divert. Only a passive node hovering off the port bow, shaped like a collapsed helix. Its interior shimmered faintly, less like light and more like gravitational bleed, forming around a coiled anchor. Feck's hands hovered over the broadcast relay. He wasn't sure if he should call for help or apologize. Concord Trade Division registered the deviation within 90 seconds. Vosrol's cargo wasn't just late, it was redirected, unauthorized, and now under surveillance by Earth's transit infrastructure. This wasn't the first incident. Within 40 hours, 2 more trade convoys vanished mid-gate and rematerialized outside Terran-controlled arcs. All 3 paths had originally bypassed Sol altogether. They were rerouted without onboard jump recalculations. Earth hadn't stolen the shipments. It had rerouted the lanes themselves. Inside the Concord Trade Council's primary chamber, a split wall of projection charts glowed red. Key regions flickered as connection strands flicked out of sync, routes scrambled by unseen gravitational bends that shouldn't have existed. Counselor Darn Vesic pressed his fingers to his temple, eyes narrowed at the smearing light trails on the screen. Their collapsing junction latency, he muttered. Shaping transit folds mid-route, like the gate never needed our architecture in the first place, someone finished behind him. A projection node sparked as another lane blinked from Concord Control. A 4th ship, Alrin-class medical transport, now hovered silently above Terran Zone Theta 9. Its data log contained no breach, no error code, only route, corrected by external anchor match. Counselor Thren Vosk stepped onto the floor, his boots echoing across the composite tiles. He didn't look at the map. He stared at the empty seat of the Miras block representative, who hadn't returned since the last closed-door panic vote. "You are going to ask whether this is an act of force," he said quietly. "Whether Earth has weaponized transit infrastructure." Several counselors turned to him. "I'll give you a simpler answer," he continued. "They no longer need the roads we built, and now they're shaping new ones. Around us. On Earth, deep within a blacked-out control center under Antarctic ice, Colonel Jex Marn reviewed a heat-layered map showing Concord corridors overlaid with newly seeded Terran mesh anchor nodes. Each intersection pulsed in steady cycles, blinking to confirm their locked-to-gravity folds Earth now controlled. Varen Solas stood behind him, reviewing a separate panel. Non-reactive signal logs from the intercepted vessels. All comms had been left untouched. Every ship allowed to pass after the delay. "We've changed the routes, not the rights," Marn said. "People don't see it that way," Solas answered. "Let them react." Solas didn't nod. He stepped forward, tapping on the mesh visualization. 3 more anchors. Target their peripheral markets. Don't intercept core freight. Not yet. Let them collapse under their own fracture. The cold in the room bit at the fingertips, frost curling around floor seams. They left the lights off, by design. This wasn't a chamber for declarations. It was a vault built to outlast interruption. Within Concord's civil records, the Alari Consortium filed a formal protest over trade route collapse. The next day, the Miras bloc unilaterally dissolved its trade contributions, citing structural sabotage. One by one, smaller entities withdrew economic participation, not out of agreement with Earth, but because the gate they'd relied on now rerouted without invitation. Inside the Concord core treasury, supply charts spun wildly out of balance. Every delay echoed across logistics like a fracture carried through crystal. No battleships had fired, no embargo had been declared, yet the economy split along lines no one could fix. Delegate Yaroon, chair of Concord's Structural Stability Office, addressed the Financial Assembly with glassy eyes. "This isn't blockade, it's removal. They didn't attack us, they erased our relevance." Back on Earth, Donat reviewed the current gate stabilization feed as a 7th anchor came online. Its form locked into place with a fluid spin, shaping not like a wheel, but like a lens drawing spatial memory inward. Each mesh node carried biometric code patterns, But more importantly, it was linked through Terran neural field algorithms. Subtle psychological rhythm trackers that adjusted gravity bend according to human-coded familiarity. Concord's attempts to mimic the mesh failed repeatedly. Their engineers lacked the cognitive architecture the mesh demanded. It doesn't open for them, Dinat said, breaking the silence. It was never built to, Solus replied. Above the planet, 3 Terran mesh gates now hovered at the edge of the Concord's former commercial lanes. Not broadcasting, not defending, just observing. Their presence forced movement around them, not through. And with every turn rerouted, another pillar of Concord's control collapsed. Solus folded his arms as the data feeds calmed. No celebration, no statement. Just the slow rise of a system that no longer recognized gatekeepers. Counselor Thren Vosk stepped onto the black deck of the diplomatic carrier Veritas Ark, his boots echoing against the insulated polymer with an impatient cadence. He didn't glance at the assembled escort officers or the diplomatic aides that had filed behind him in tight formation. His eyes were locked on the destination ahead. The object orbiting in silence just over the galactic threshold line, Earth's primary anchor gate, designated Orion Interstice Node 1. The gate floated as though forgotten, fixed in place at a point of celestial nothingness. No defense perimeter, no visible reactor banks, not even a beacon light, just a vast black ring, rotating without propulsion, its internal lining warped inward like an incomplete spiral. The surface didn't reflect the stars around it. It seemed to drink the light instead, leaving a gap where reality was supposed to meet infrastructure. Final approach trajectory set, the pilot called out, his voice steady but hushed. Docking vector aligned, no resistance from automated defense systems. That's because they have nothing to defend, Vosk said sharply. This structure was built to make a point, not protect a border. The aide beside him, a younger analyst from the Kargari delegation, swallowed hard and activated the transmission module embedded in his forearm. Signal Protocol 14 Delta broadcasted on all Terran diplomatic bands. Give it 20 seconds, Vosk ordered. The room fell quiet save for the ambient processing buzz from the vessel's environmental regulators. No reply, no error bounce, no carrier rejection. Just silence. Vosk narrowed his gaze and tapped the comm panel personally. He entered the universal diplomatic handshake sequence. A code dating back to Concord's earliest treaties, used to verify non-hostile requests for contact. The gate didn't flash, it didn't cycle, the signal went out, and nothing came back. I want biometric confirmation. Patch through all registered Terran genetic codes available in our archive, Vosk said. We've included 12 verified human templates, the aide responded, fingers flying over the console. Add 30 more. Behind them, a technical advisor muttered under his breath. Their last gate responses operated on real-time neural thresholds. If they've hardened to cognitive baseline syncing, Vosk turned. They've hardened to irrelevance. He stepped to the forward viewing pane where the gate filled the frame like an eclipse that never finished closing. Its rotation continued in slow, unchanging rhythm. Not menacing, not inviting, just indifferent. Send physical probe, he said. A small deployment hatch opened along the vessel's midsection. From it, a survey pod emerged, equipped with full harmonic broadcasting, atmospheric analysis arrays, and diplomatic insignias broadcast on loop. The pod approached the gate slowly, its lights casting faint rays across the dark surface, trying to catch shape or texture. The pod touched the outer rim. Nothing changed. It drifted sideways, attempting interior passage through the central frame. Still nothing. It didn't vanish, it didn't spark, it just kept drifting, as if the gate didn't even acknowledge that matter had entered its centerline. The system's not rejecting us, the pilot whispered. It's worse, Vosk replied. We've already been forgotten. Across the stars, in Concord's 3 capital worlds, Valdrin, Orisek, and Sharaton, citizens looked upward as unmanned Terran drones descended into synchronous hover above each central administration hub. They did not fire, didn't emit signals, or project anything. Their hulls bore no weapons. They didn't even rotate. They simply entered their positions and held. Concord military dispatch scrambled to deploy interception units. None of the drones moved. None of them responded to targeting systems. Every attempt to track internal activity failed. The drones emitted no power signature, no thermal variance. They weren't threats. They were observers. And they made their audience feel like suspects. Back aboard the Veritas Ark, Vosk stepped away from the viewing pane and activated the internal feed loop. The diplomatic module had finished its cycle through every known Terran identification key. Not one of them had been acknowledged by the gate. He leaned forward and opened the internal recording node. Archive this. Official record. Or Orion interstice activation failure. Attempted approach using all known Terran protocols. 0 response. Environmental field within gate measured stable. No defense sequence triggered. Structure remains inert. Vessel not attacked. Communications unanswered. Gate uninterested. His words cracked slightly at the end, though he masked it behind clipped syntax. This wasn't a failure of diplomacy. It was something older and sharper. Humiliation by exclusion. Not through force. Through indifference. Back on Earth, within the subterranean operations vault, Varen Solas stood with arms crossed, watching the feed from the drones posted over Concord capitals. The drones weren't equipped to attack. They were there to record. 3 simultaneous presence markers, Colonel Jexmar noted, standing at the adjacent terminal. No Concord fleet has moved yet. They're still trying to frame it as a posturing maneuver. They're still playing by rules that expired 2 years ago, Solas said. Think they'll understand what happened today at Orion? Solas didn't answer. He stepped forward, placed one palm flat on the wall-mounted interface, and adjusted the visual overlay to display the full mesh grid. Every gate Earth had built shimmered faintly across the projection. The Orion interstice pulsed slower than the rest, its field signature dormant, uninterested in the commotion it had caused. It didn't block them, Solas finally said. It didn't judge them. He tapped the interface once. The mesh condensed slightly. It erased the idea they were ever part of the conversation. Arn nodded once and turned away. There was nothing else to say. On the bridge of the Veritas Ark, the diplomatic team reviewed their final data logs. One technician, a younger officer from the Veldari group, stared at the screen as the data packet failed to refresh. His voice broke the silence. Sir, the gate's automainer just stopped scanning us. Vosk stood still. What do you mean stopped? The officer turned, nervous. It was passively pinging all orbitals. Now, we're no longer on its radius sweep. The gate hadn't closed. It had ceased to recognize they existed at all. The assembly vault was darker than usual. No ambient projections, no diplomatic feed. Just the natural flicker of recessed overhead lights reflected in the black tile of the circular table where Earth's leadership now gathered. They hadn't been summoned. No alarms had sounded. They came because this was the moment they'd all known would arrive. Varen Solas stood at the center, alone, without a datapad, without a security escort. He didn't pace. He didn't wait for silence. He brought it with him. The Orion Gate didn't reject the Concord delegation, he began. It never even noticed them. No one responded. He turned slowly, meeting the gaze of each man present as if ensuring their attention wasn't just procedural. It was ownership. Ellie failed to engage it with everything they had: genetic mimicry, procedural broadcast, direct material contact. And what they learned, finally, is that we didn't build a system that denies access. He stopped near his chair but didn't sit. We built one that doesn't require permission to ignore. General Corvalin shifted, eyes heavy from a night spent watching fleet diagnostics that never fired. They'll spin it. Claim sabotage. Political sabotage or system failure. Solas didn't break eye contact. They can spin into ash. It won't change where they stand. Outside. Colonel Jexmarn leaned forward, one elbow planted firmly on the cold slab surface. I've traced Concord tactical units over the last 2 weeks. No ships posted near our gates, not even shadow drones. Interception attempts have stopped. They're They're waiting for a way in, Balin said. They're still hoping. Dr. Alaric Denat entered then, his lab coat damp from cold recycling air in the lunar processing vault. His breath was clipped from movement, but his tone was calm. Tiboli can't hope their way through architecture. The mesh isn't code, it's alignment. It accepts only Terran thought patterns, embedded not just through biology, but through origin. He opened a palm-sized projector and placed it on the table. A soft, multi-layered grid appeared above it, glowing faintly. The projection showed the full Terran mesh, anchors, folds, bleed arcs, all hovering across sectors in interlinked motion. This structure doesn't read credentials. It resonates with identity, psychological rhythm bonded to Terran neural cadence. That's why they can't map it. It responds to presence in the way a scar responds to memory. Solus finally took his seat, the chair making a low scrape against the tile. It's not a wall. It's a lens, built to reflect only one form of continuity. Theirs breaks, ours doesn't. Trevak, one of the few remaining civilian envoys on Earth's unified council, frowned. So, we've locked the galaxy out. Completely. No, Solus corrected. We've stopped offering the idea that they were ever inside. Balin grunted. And if they try again? They won't. Silence stretched, no need for forecasts or escalations, no strategies to adjust. The confrontation had already occurred. And the result wasn't war, it was removal. Denat shut down the projection and took a slow breath. There's one final node under assembly, high orbit structure, above the Vescan perimeter. Marn straightened. That's Concord birthsite territory. Exactly, Solus replied. That's where Lock Point Zero will sit. A small ripple moved through the room. Not from surprise, but from the weight of the name. It wasn't a gate, not in the way the others were. It would serve no traffic. It wouldn't activate for routine passage. It would exist as a final confirmation. The structure will carry no entry function, only observation capacity and encoded denial, and its one rule will never change. He looked around the room. It opened for no one. Trebek cleared his throat. Even us? Solus didn't smile. Especially us. It activates once, then it remembers. Permanently. The lights overhead flickered once as the external seismic dampeners rebalanced from a minor tectonic shift in the upper crust. Dust floated briefly down from one corner of the chamber. Soft, unannounced, a reminder that Earth itself was always listening beneath the concrete. Solus rose again. We were mocked for wanting a seat. We gave up trying to earn one. Then we moved the table. Valen stood beside him. And now? Now, we build what they cannot translate, what they cannot imitate. Not because it's stronger, but because it doesn't explain itself to them. Outside the vault, the mesh structure above Earth shifted. Quiet anchor rings adjusted their folds, sinking to rotational gravity waves. No lights blinked, no beacon transmitted. But every anchor was alive, active in silence. Marn watched the shift through the auxiliary feed. Every ship reports stable function, no alien trails, not even passive relay signals. Solus walked toward the exit. Then we've reached the phase where nothing more is required. As the door slid closed behind him, Denat looked at the grid once more. Each path folding inward like language no outsider could pronounce. The Vescan hold was gone. What remained in its place was orbital scatter, slabs of glass shard debris drifting like forgotten verdicts. Its central hub, once Concord's seat of arbitration, had been vaporized by the slow collapse of diplomacy, not weapons. Power had left, not because it was taken, but because it was no longer recognized. And now, in the emptiness above it, Earth raised something final. Lock Point Zero emerged from black space transport 3 hours before planetary dusk. It unfolded in silence, plates rotating outward with deliberate audible clicks that echoed through each docking clasp like a vault ceiling from the inside. The structure formed a tilted arch, wide enough for a capital vessel to pass through, though none would be allowed to. At the center of its interior ring pulsed a dull light. Once, then faded. A Terran shuttle crossed through. The light blinked once more, then, permanently dark. Colonel Jax Marn stood aboard T&V Halberd, observing from the command deck as the last calibrations locked into place. "That's it," he said, arms crossed, tone flat. "No more entry, no more alignment shifts. One activation, one acknowledgement." Varen Solis remained at the rear of the bridge, silent, his gaze fixed not on the gate itself but the growing exclusion zone around it. Merchant routes had already adjusted. Freight AI from 6 former Concord states had rerouted their transit corridors by 90 degrees, bending their entire economies away from Terran territory without being told to. "They're teaching their nav systems to forget us," Marn muttered. "No," Solas replied. "They're teaching themselves not to ask again." A technician at the forward panel adjusted internal feeds. One final protocol remained: the installation of the orbital plaque. A small carrier drone deployed from Lockpoint Zero's underside. It moved like a relic-bearing monk, slow and without deviation, positioning itself beneath the front face of the arch. A single panel extended outward, and the plaque was affixed without magnetics or fasteners. "Just wait." The message was etched in hardened composite. "Closed is a choice, ours is permanent. No flags, no emblems. Just the phrase. Just Earth's presence made permanent not by strength, but refusal." At Concord's emergency summit, held in fragmented partitions across separate stations, the question returned like a bruise, reopened every time it touched air. "What do they want?" a representative from the Jalari Enclave asked. Vosk Haran, now operating without a block behind him, sat with hands clasped. He answered with no expression. That he wanted to build something they didn't need permission for. And now? The assembly chamber emptied slower than usual. Delegates lingered, reading closed reports, deleting unfinished communiques, pretending they still had something to file. None of them spoke about retaliation. Not one motion of recourse passed. Because the Concord no longer existed, and no successor block wanted Earth's attention. Back aboard Earth's high-orbit coordination platform, Dinette finalized the shutdown protocols for Lockpoint Zero. The gate would still be monitored, but it would never open again. Solis approached from the side, unspoken approval in his posture. "You still believe it was the right decision?" Dennett asked without looking. "I don't believe anything about this was a decision," Solis said. "They closed us out. We responded by becoming inaccessible." Dinette powered down the final sequence. "And now?" Solis stepped forward, placing a hand on the viewing glass as the arch drifted slowly in orbital sync over the ruins of Veskenhold. "Now we don't build to impress. We build so they remember not to try again." In orbit, Lockpoint Zero hovered in silence, casting no signal, offering no link. The first galactic trade simulation showed a permanent gap in route mapping where Earth's mesh resided. The AI flagged it as dead zone, not because it was dangerous, because it didn't allow interaction. Alien merchants rerouted, civilian traders adjusted manifests, political blocs realigned their spheres of influence. They all bent around a thing that Earth had become, not because it reached for dominance, but because it didn't acknowledge them anymore. In the final hours of the cycle, Earth's unified assembly convened one last time for public confirmation. No declarations, no votes, just a record. Chervak entered the note on record. Project status: Lockpoint Zero, complete. No further expansion authorized. All future gate activity restricted to Terran cadence key. Solis added nothing to the file. His part had finished. He exited the chamber, walking a corridor lined with crew terminals, each manned by a silent operator watching real-time space feeds. Not one showed incoming contact. Not one prepared for diplomatic transmission. The galaxy had gone quiet. Not because Earth enforced silence, but because everyone had stopped trying to be heard. Inside his quarters, Solis removed the last data slate from his desk. It contained the original rejection notice, preserved in non-networked memory. No insignia, no emblem. Just one phrase. Application. Rejected. Quarantine class. Do not attempt contact. He placed it into the vault beside the signed directive Halian's slate. The door closed behind him with no ceremony, and Earth continued forward, not alone, not hostile, but untouchable, because they had closed their gates, and we had built one that didn't open for them.